Given the choice, I'll always go with the fresh brewed coffee scented, sizzling griddle sounding, sit where you'd like diner over any other kind of restaurant. Their straightforward menus and no frills aesthetics have always been a beacon to me, and I know I'm not alone. Scott hosts Diner Day in the USA, an Instagram account which celebrates diners of all shapes and sizes in every corner of the country. We connected recently to discuss these eateries and how they act as documents of the time periods in which they were first made. I'll give you a heads up, it will be hard to resist heading to your nearest diner after hearing this podcast. Order up! Welcome back to the Everything is a Primary Source podcast. I'm Eric Paul, and I'm joined today by Scott of Diner Day in the USA, and our very rapid, quick meeting just the other day through Instagram is one of the reasons I love the internet. I know the internet can be like a spoiler in people's lives in a lot of ways, but I love the internet because how quickly we came together, and then we realized we don't live that far away from each other. But Scott, welcome to the EPS podcast.
Thanks so much. Appreciate the opportunity.
So when I was attracted to your Instagram, because, well, I love diners. I love the facades of diners. I love their appearance. I was just saying before I hit record that when I'm traveling, I see them as like the beacon. Even it doesn't have to be dark out, but it's like the beacon in the light. Like, oh, diner.
Yeah.
You know, I hope I have cash because a lot of them don't take debit.
That's
card.
right.
But so I was attracted to it by that, and then when we messaged back and forth. Now I kind of assumed that you were, based somewhere further west, because like northern New England isn't exactly, at least from my perspective, diner country. I always picture it further inland a little bit more. And then we were like going back and forth, and you're like, I'm north of Boston. And I'm like, so am I. And then you're like,
right,
I'm in New Hampshire. So am I.
Am I.
Back and forth like that. So legit, we could probably do this in person, but I'm glad we could make this work out so quick.
Yeah, for podcast number 2, we'll find a diner.
Yes,
for the next installment,
because
that sounds like a good idea.
I think that's a great idea, because I want to talk about. We'll try to narrow it down to one diner tonight, but they have a lot in common with each other. I know some of them were like assembly line products, the actual cars themselves.
Yes.
But each one is so individually unique, and that's one of the appeals, I think, of diners. Is that what drew you to making this Instagram?
Yeah, well, why don't I'll take you back to kind of where I grew up and kind of the roots of where I come from, and that might kind of help elucidate kind of why I'm doing what I'm doing at this point. So I grew up in Eastern Pennsylvania, Allentown, Bethlehem, Lehigh Valley area.
Mm-hmm.
Spent really of my whole childhood there. But my mom had her parents actually grew up in New Jersey. Well, they lived in New Jersey for a time, in Mountainside, New Jersey, and New Jersey that is the place of diners, right? That is the place. So we lived right on the border of New Jersey, and, Lehigh Valley has its own set of diners. But also when we would visit them in Mountainside, we'd always, right along Route 22, there's a whole bunch of diners in Scotch Plains and Mountainside. So there's always be someplace to eat, no matter what time of day it was. But really, when I was really little, I grew up, going to Catholic, catechism, and going to Catholic school on Sunday morning. And, I was an altar boy. And one of the big things for me was, well, if I do the Sunday morning 7 a.m. mass as an altar boy, I'm the only altar boy. And I do all the things at church, but the real kicker is that my mom will take me out to diner afterwards. So it'll just be my mom or my dad would come every so often to early morning 7 a.m. Service, and we would go to, usually it was a City View diner in Allentown, Whitehall area, or the Rainbow Diner, which is somewhat nearby. The City View diner is actually still around.
Oh, good.
So when I go back home, it's still there, and I go there, quite often. And so, I grew up all the time just around diners, going up, staying up late, my teens, In college, I was out in Gettysburg, so we went to Lincoln Diner.
Oh
And
wow,
Lincoln
yeah.
Diner, and Lincoln Diner is a
Yeah.
24/7 place, and so you just walk from campus to the what they call the LD. LD is Lincoln Diner, right on the train tracks there in Gettysburg, and we would just you know do diners.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
they're just so warm, and the names are so like City View, Rainbow, even I mean they're just so perfect. Like they're not trying to be, it's like it's almost like self-effacing. They know that they're not fine dining, but they also
right.
know that they're not junky. So they give you a nice, kind of in between. And so and a lot of them, you know, actually did have relationships with motels. A lot of those like individually owned, privately owned motels are similar in that, where they would
That's
come
right.
up with, those kinds of names, like knowing exactly their clientele.
Yeah,
Actually, we were just in Gettysburg. I love Gettysburg.
it's
As
a
a
great
history
spot.
history teacher, I'm like, that's, and
Yeah.
I have, we'll have to do another podcast at some point, because I have some cool stories about Gettysburg. Our most recent visit, we went back during in October, and it was unseasonably cold. We tried to camp in outside of Gettysburg on
Yeah.
west of town, and oh my goodness, we had to cut our trip short. It was just unbelievably cold. We didn't go to the Lincoln Diner, but we did go to the old tavern that's in
Oh,
town
nice.
right by the battlefield. And that,
Yeah.
taverns and diners share a lot in common of just being like road food. So
Yes.
I think that's a good place to get started with the actual breaking down of dissecting them. Any tavern as a or tavern diner as a document of its time, a primary source, if you will. So for those of you listening to this podcast for the first time, what I do is, and this is an extension of what I do as a teacher in my classroom, is we take items, usually non-traditional things, as most people think of primary sources, newspapers and diaries and letters and things like that, or Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address would be a great example, and break it down. But we take non-traditional things like movies and TV shows, and in this case diners, and treat them the same way. So the first question that we have is the material that it's made from, or how is it made. um, with a lot of these diners, and I think this also links to the question of the intended audience. Where are you going to find most of these eating establishments?
Yeah, I mean, you can find them almost anywhere. I
Mhm.
mean, if you just think of just geographically, kind of where they started from is really in the New Jersey area, and
Right.
there are multiple manufacturers of kind of prefab diners, and they would be transported by train or truck or trailer
Mhm.
to a designated place. And so there are different manufacturers. So the Federo manufacturer. I'm trying to think of others actually off the top of my head, but there are many others, and they had a certain shape, a certain way of being manufactured, a certain look on the interior. And if you wanted to start your own business, and a lot of these were built in the 30s and 40s and 50s,
Mhm.
you could buy this prefab diner, plop it down in an area, and it had all the areas, or all the parts of a place that you could own your own restaurant.
Right.
um, and it was portable. You could move it from one place to another.
Yeah.
um, it really did depend on what the look you wanted from the type of diner you wanted to build, or you wanted to buy. And in some cases, you may see the kind of the classic kind of diner.
Mhm.
Others would have that diner, but then they would put a different roof on it, so you wouldn't even know that there was like a diner inside.
Right.
From the outside, you can't tell that this is, oh wow, this is a Silk City diner. You only know unless you walk into the place. You're like, oh my god, this is a Silk City diner. When I was in Northampton, Pennsylvania, which is right next to where I grew up, there's a Northampton diner and restaurant.
Mhm.
I grew up in that area for so long, never went into the place. And about 3 years ago, I went in. I'm like, oh my God, this place is beautiful on the inside, because it's one
Right.
of those prefab, diners, and they just built on top of it. So you'd never know it from the outside.
So I love diner food. I always have. I love an omelet with home fries and toast, and I love
Yeah.
burgers and milkshakes and of course the coffee. There's a lot of
Yes.
places that call themselves diners, and I think they do that because they have that kind of fare. Like they just serve regular, straight up American food. But I give extra credibility when I can see it's an actual diner,
Mm.
even if it's transformed, even if the dining area, the actual lounge area has outgrown the original
Yes.
size of the car, which, like you're saying, so many of them have. I i those ones get my attention more than anybody else because I'm like, these connect me to that, you know post World War I era, like that 20s,
Yes.
30s, 40s, the interwar years, really. And what a perfect time. I mean, of course these things were produced then because you had, and it repeats itself after World War II, that idea of just ordinary person being the entrepreneur, that you don't need to be with a business degree or having, we just, as we always do, we watch It's a Wonderful Life,
Right.
right around, and the message, and that's even though it was made 46, it's has a lot of stuff about the interwar years, and that's kind of the message that the Bailey Building and Loan sends over and over again, is that, you know everybody should have that opportunity to own a house, to have a business, and
That's
to
right.
have support network from the locals. And that's where it seems like a lot of these places came from, that they were, like you said, somebody that wanted to start their own business. And franchising is what happened after World War II, that allowed for the same kind of thing to be, the same ideas to be met, of like, yeah, I would love to be a business owner. I just don't have the ability, the time, to build it from the ground up. But if it comes prefab, I can
That's
probably
right.
figure my way around that. So, and that actually answers a few of our questions right there. It was made, from like a factory, but the actual person who made it may have been just anybody. Somebody was like, yeah, I would love to be a restaurateur, but not necessarily, I so I have a lot of respect for those kinds of diners that have maintained that appearance throughout. We were talking beforehand about the Palace diner
Yeah.
up in Biddeford, Maine, and I went up there in the summertime, and they are a legit diner. They have 15 seats, and they're all at the
Yes.
counter. There's no dining room, it's just sit at the counter. And we were so naive, my wife and I. We went up there, and we didn't see anybody around, so we walked right in. We saw two spaces available. We started to sit down. The guy was so nice, but he was like, actually, there's a waiting list, and he took our name. We waited for 2 hours. We had nothing else to do, so, and it's cash only. They don't, when we finally got to sit in there, I'm like, they've basically been doing the same thing for about 100 years there. Do you get that
Yeah.
that feel from the best diners that you go to?
Yeah. No, in particular, the Palestiner, they actually had closed for a while to actually do some renovations on their kitchen.
Mm.
So actually upgrade their kitchen area, kind of the backside of their diner, to make it even, a better experience from, from the business perspective for them,
Yeah.
but the actually interior that you were sitting at and I have as well, and it's on my on Instagram diner feed, as well as one of the places that I love to go to.
Mhm.
I mean, it's so authentic. I mean, just you, like you said, you step inside, you enter from one end, and you're just like, yeah, there are the 15
Yeah.
stools. You got 15, you know.
And you're gonna get cozy with whoever else is sitting there.
You're gonna get cozy with someone else. Um, but again, like we talked about a little bit before, the food there is so fantastic. It's kind of little they upscale diner
Yeah.
food is what I call it.
Yeah.
It's not the typical. I mean, it's typical diner food, but it's plus one or
Right.
plus two,
It's
right?
kind of been injected by modernity a little bit. Like they recognize
And
that.
chefs,
Right. They know what they're doing. They're
yes,
foodies, I guess would be the term.
yes,
That
they
they're
are.
foodies who have a diner. but I'm just glad they didn't go too far, because there is that
Right.
temptation. I've seen it happen at other diners too, which I usually don't just walk into, because like if I'm looking at the menu and it has a little bit more exotic stuff, I'm like, yeah, I kind of,
This is not a
right,
diner. You
like,
kind of expect certain things when you go
yeah.
into a diner, certainly.
And I don't mind a lengthy menu. There's I'm familiar with a lot of diners in the Albany, New York area, because I have
Yeah.
family there, and so for better part of 2 decades now, I whenever I'm in Albany, it's like, yeah, we'll go to the Latham Circle Diner, or the
Capital
the
City
Route
Diner.
9. There's a city diner, uh Capital Diner, and
Yeah.
those ones are those chrome exterior ones,
Yeah.
and some of them, their menus are like set. It's like, going to a cheesecake factory. It's like seven
That's
pages
right.
long,
Yeah.
but nothing outlandish. It's all just like, you know regular fare that you'd get anywhere else. It's just, they can do it, and they know that their audience is a pretty wide one.
There was actually, speaking of that, there was a place in Springfield I went to not too long ago, within the last couple of years. And I was talking to I was talking to several of the people there who were working there, and they said, "Hey, do you want to take a look at one of our older menus?" I said, "Sure, that'd be awesome." They they pulled out a menu that was one of their original menus
Oh my goodness.
back from like 19, I can't, like 45 maybe. And some of I took pictures of, because it's so amazing to see what was offered back then. And yeah, it's changed. It's certainly changed over time, but um it's kind of the same stuff, right?
Yeah.
You know,
One of my
kind of
favorite
amazing.
in my household, I actually, my brother gave me this as, I think he thinks it was just like a throwaway gift that he gave me years ago when I was like just out of college and living on my own. It was this, I think he got it at a Christmas tree shop. It was this plate that was meant to look like a 40s or 50s diner menu around the side. And
Yeah,
it had like, half stack and, bacon for 10 cents, and, and all these different concoctions and stuff. I love it. I think it's just great. And I made, somehow it's survived all these years, and I still use it all the time. Um, Especially when I'm making those kinds of food myself.
right, right.
And by the way, I can never perfect it. There's something about a diner grill, that flat top
The flat top, it
is like,
is.
you can't replicate it that at home. But
No,
it's
it's a
some of the
seasoned
stuff on there,
flat
I'm
top
like,
grill.
yeah, it's, oh my god, there's like, that's another thing. As soon as I walk into a diner, if I see that thing going, and I love, the cook who organizes it so well. He's moving things around, he's positioning the right. I got some sausage patties going on the back, I'll put the press on it, and maybe some home fries that are cooked up, and you hear that clacking of his spatulas, against everything. I'm like, that's, the
That's right.
sounds that you need, and the sights that you need in a diner.
And the steam and the hoods going
Yep.
like full blast, and you wonder, like, after a shift like that, like how many times he has to, he or she has to shower to
Right.
get rid of all
Yeah,
that
because they smell
grease and
like grease and grime,
grime
yeah,
and
it,
diner being dinery.
yeah, and that, I think, is what shows something about the palace. When I was there, it seemed like the people were all very much like, yeah, I'm glad to be doing this. It's not like, a job that I just kind of fell into, or fell back on. Like, they understand that their place. And I remember asking the guy who was sort of the front of the house, has this place ever moved? Thinking, because they are, like you said, mobile. And he said, well, not really. He's like, we moved it like just a different direction. Like back in the 70s or something, it was like facing
Yeah,
one way and they moved it another way. And so all I could think of, thinking about the history of that place and so many other diners, Biddeford has those huge mills, and all I could just picture in my head
that's
is
what it was for.
4 a.m.,
Yes,
before the day starts at those places, before the whistle goes off to tell them it's time to get to work. That, just huddled up at those 15 spots are employees of the mills, and they're just having their coffee and their eggs, and they're about to, head to work. And
that's
that seems to be,
exactly, you're exactly right. I mean, just looking at the history, just reading back at the history of the Palace Diner, that is part of that is, when they had all those mills going,
Yeah.
that was one of the places to go back in the day
That
for food.
that's why it's kind of curious that there's not more surviving diners in the greater seacoast of New Hampshire area, because it does have a rich history with mills and factories and the Industrial Revolution. You would think that, and I know that they did exist. When I was a kid, we used to go to them sometimes. I moved away for a while. Basically general Northeast. I moved around. I lived in Maryland for a while. Maryland had some great diners between Baltimore and DC. Up and down that corridor. I used to go there all the time for breakfast. Always go to Western and Central New York has some great diners. It's just funny that this area that has that third shift in its history doesn't have nearly as many surviving diners. I mean, can you make any sense of it? Like, what from your research seems to be any reason for that?
Well, I a lot of them have been destroyed, or
Yeah.
they've been taken out and a bigger restaurant's been put in. And they're unless I'm just thinking of ones that have so say for example the one I talked about in or mentioned in Northampton, Pennsylvania, as an example. So when you walk in there, that Silk City Diner is where you walk into. However, they have a whole separate room of dining and banquet room, so they've added on in order to make it more profitable. So I think that the Palace Diner is and there's another place in Natick, Pennsylvania called Casey's, which is also an old-fashioned diner. They run it lean, but they have a clientele that enjoys going. They're always busy. So it really does depend on the area where they're at, how they run the business. There's a lot of factors that go into it. If there's not a lot of competition around, that helps. It's something a little bit different, but a lot of these places are either taken down, moved. There's a place actually recently, a diner that was moved to the new Worcester Red Sox. It was, I can't remember where it was, but one of the diner aficionados, Dick Gutman, he's kind of world famous for diners. He kind of documented how they moved the diner to where now the Worcester Red Sox are being played, and it's actually part of the ballpark.
Okay, so
it's kind of so there are places and there are people who will take a diner and then restore it and keep it in its original form.
And I guess thinking about it more, I guess what I said was rather kind of naive. Like, what happened to if I predate preface that by saying, well, they reflected the kind of work that existed, and when that work dries up, it's not like they're going to just keep a diner around because of nostalgia. They're like, well, we have because like I think about Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and just in my lifetime, that city is gentrified like crazy. Yeah, why would they make who would be holding on to a restaurant or some kind of food service if people weren't after it? I'm sure that something else took its place, or and this area is very touristy, so people tend to want the seafood. They're not going to get what they could get anywhere else here. But speaking of that, when I'm traveling, I much prefer a diner than a Wendy's or McDonald's or anything like that. And I've mentioned a few episodes already that 2 summers ago, so 2021, we took a road trip from New Hampshire all the way to the Grand Canyon, and we spent most of our time on the interstates, which isn't diner esque. You might stumble across a diner every now and then off an exit, but the US routes is where you're going to really find them. And I think as our second or third day, we were traveling from Indianapolis to Arcola, Illinois. And so we took, I forget which US route it was, but it was through part of Indiana and Illinois. It was very rural, and I was like, I have a dream. I want so badly to stumble across a nice country diner and it'd be full of, people from Indiana, and we're all the way from New Hampshire, and like sit at the counter,
Right.
and I was like, the next restaurant I see, it's bound to be that because of where we are. And we ended up stumbling across this like brand new, somebody had opened up a southwestern themed coffee shop, and in the afternoon it's like a craft beer place. I'm like, oh, so like what we were going to be getting in a few days in the Southwest, we got in Indiana early, and it definitely wasn't
Yeah.
a diner. I'm like, oh man, like, because my family was all hungry, so I'm like, I can't just keep going to justify my. It wasn't until like 2 days down the road that we finally stopped in Canadian, Texas, and
Oh, wow.
the Canadian diner, and that was the most perfect. It was called the Canadian restaurant, but it was essentially a diner,
Yeah.
and that I finally got my experience.
You
So
found it.
I got out of my vehicle, and we had camped the night before, so I didn't really think about what I was putting on, but I looked like a Kennedy, like straight from New England. 'Cause I had these like white shorts and
Oh,
this
no.
like nautical themed like polo shirt, and I walk in, and it looked like from the '60s, and they all kind of,
They're
and they
like, you're
don't,
not from around here.
right? They're like a Kennedy in Texas, um,
Right.
and I was, and yeah, we got a lot of stares, but they were so friendly, they were so nice, and best steak I ever had was I had steak and eggs, and it was just fantastic. So I got
Nice.
to live that. And then in New Mexico, we stopped on Route 66 at a
Nice.
another diner. And they were one of those places I know that they're kind of famous. They had a gift shop and everything, and
Yeah.
got one of their, I think it was called the Silver Moon Cafe. It was really good. But
Well, that's one of the things about just traveling just in general that I know, because I travel for work, and if I know I'm going to a certain city, I'll research it ahead of time and
mhm,
say where are the kind of the places to go to,
right.
from a diner perspective. And like your road trip that you just mentioned, along that was my question. Did you ever go along Route 66? Because there's so many places
Yes.
along Route 66, and a lot of the people I follow on Instagram and other platforms, they document their time on Route 66, and it looks awesome,
Yeah.
absolutely awesome.
It's and what's funny is that there is a lot of sections of that road that are very sad and depressing because it's just derelict. It's all
Yes.
gone. And ghost town, because I-40 just took it over so quickly. It's like
Yeah.
the lifespan of 66 wasn't actually that long. It was only a few decades. But even the places that are all run down and falling apart have a kind of neat frozen in time aesthetic to them, that the
Yeah.
ones that are still running, they're just pulling from it. They're like, yeah,
Yeah.
come,
Yeah.
they gigantic arrow pointing to their parking lot, and they're going to keep the sign that says, open 24 hours, all night, just to keep the people coming.
Well, I think part of the reason why I think at least I enjoy the road trip is for that vintage stuff that you just can't find anywhere else. I mean, you could always go to, down the street in Portsmouth or Newington, you'll see a Trader Joe's and you'll see the
Right.
Best Buy, and then you'll go to St. Louis and you could see a Best Buy and
Mhm.
Trader Joe's. I'm like, I want to see what is
Right.
different in these places, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's what the vintage aspect of things is. That's what, and the signs, like the neon signs as well, they're, sometimes part of it, and the chrome and the outside.
Mhm.
It's just awesome.
Yeah.
When
It's we're not the only two people that celebrate that either by any
yeah,
means. It's something that seems to be surging pretty good on Instagram and elsewhere on the internet, where it's like we recognize that, yes, maybe the time has passed for a lot of these places, but plenty of them still deserve to be here and celebrated and enjoyed because of what they offer, which is still fantastic food and local flair. Even if it's not super unique flavors to the food, they have that, just the ads that border the placemat, you can't get anywhere else, or the ceramic mug that has some kind of local car dealership name on it, just to help pay the bills a little bit.
but I always view it as you're entering a part of that area of life, right? So you're getting to kind of understand who are the characters in town,
Right.
because they all know each other, right? When you go in there and you start looking around, you're like, you're trying to size things up, like where
Yeah.
am I going to sit and where am I going and who's that guy and what about that waiter or what about this
Yeah.
waitress, like what's going on. Within like 10 minutes I kind of have it sized up. I'm like, okay, that person knows this person does a trucking, and this guy,
Right.
and it's just like that sort of thing that's the other aspect of it, which I think is just so much fun, that you become part of that fabric. You
Right.
start to learn, you start to kind of understand what it's all about. And it's I love learning. That's, you got to keep on learning, different things.
It's absolutely right. I mean, I think about so many movies and TV shows that either are set in diners, like the movie Diner, or just have it as part of their storyline. And like I think about The Sopranos, and I don't know if you ever watched that,
Yeah,
but when
of course.
when what's his the guy who comes off to New Hampshire, he first, when he gets to this fake place in New Hampshire, that's where he first goes and does exactly what you're describing. He sizes up, kind of the town and the feel of the place from the diner, and the guy working behind there is, doing the cook stuff, is ends up being kind of his guide in town and all that. So and he's from New Jersey, which is diner central.
That's right. That's right.
So he knows his way around, and what that means. While most original diners are products of the interwar years, they've maintained their status in American society and culture because of the wants and needs that they have and continue to satisfy. Taking a variety of diners apart to their essentials informs us that they were made in a time when American occupations had shifted quite a bit. After the Second Industrial Revolution came to an end, there were fewer farmers and more industrial workers and tradespeople than ever before. Their work days and week were more rigidly defined than in the agrarian past, creating a demand for business, especially food service, to adjust accordingly. For the last 100 some odd years, counters have been populated by blue and white collar workers alike, before and after work hours, for a bite to eat. Diners also took over where taverns and inns of the 18th and 19th centuries left off. Plenty of diners have had and continue to boast local regulars, the folks that don't even need to look at a menu, as well as weary travelers, given that many of the placements of these places, these diners, are next to main roads. But instead of rum punch and a small cot to offer visitors, diners will serve omelets and a cushioned booth. The second half of the podcast has Scott and I digging even deeper into the how and why of diners, giving great insights into American history, both distant and recent. You can hear it by becoming a paid subscriber, either at Substack at epspodcast.substack.com, or over on Patreon, patreon.com/EPSpodcast. Otherwise, I hope you've enjoyed listening to what you've heard of the EPS podcast, where everything, including diners, are primary sources.